Hey everyone, this is Elijah Johnson with FinanceAndLiberty.com, and back with us today are Andy Hoffman and Chris Duane. Andy and Chris, thank you so much for joining us today.
Always a pleasure, Elijah.
Yeah, it's good to be back again.
Well, I was wondering if we could first discuss about the precious metal markets. We saw silver go to about $15, now it jumped back to about $16. We're seeing precious metals really under pressure right now. I know we've talked a lot about this before, and that it seems like precious metals are being artificially suppressed by manipulation. Starting with Andy, did you want to discuss a little bit about what you see happening right now?
Look, I remember back, it was somewhere around 2005 or so, I was sitting in my office, and I said to myself, my God, each day is worse than the last. And it's hard to believe that a decade later, that relationship has continued. You go back to September of 2011, when clearly the powers that be decided that they needed to really attack gold, because it was getting out of hand. Then the closed-door meeting, April 2013, between Obama and the top CEOs of the too-big-to-fail banks, when you had the big smash afterward. And now, of course, what we've seen this month, nothing even compares to it in the blatancy of every single key attack time of every single day, counterintuitively, amidst the ECB announcing QE, amidst Japan announcing QE. And, is it because of the Swiss referendum that's coming up in 2 weeks, or is it all of the above? Frankly, I believe that the Swiss referendum is the number one thing that they fear, because I believe it's the end of the cartel, it's the end of the ability to control the world with paper money, if that's a yes vote. But again, sadly, it's not the only thing that they're worried about.
Now, turning to you, Chris, what is your perspective on why we're seeing precious metals down so low?
Oh, I don't think it's out of central bank strength that they're doing this. I don't think that the economy is doing well, and that people are getting back to work, and that there's more interest in the dollar, and that everything's turning out okay for the central planners of the world. I think this is all done out of absolute desperation. They cannot afford to let the cat out of the bag, and when it does get out, it's going to get out of control. Because once history shows, as soon as people lose faith in paper currencies, it's all over. I mean, it's like trying to believe in Santa Claus after you find out that there is no Santa Claus. It doesn't happen anymore. So that's what they're trying to do. Andy was talking about almost a decade ago, silver was back at $15, and I did a video comparing the global debt, in 2006 to what it is today, and it's double. I look at the amount of people that are on welfare stamps, it's double. You look at the nations that are coming out against the dollar, it's magnitudes more. I mean, you got huge nations like China and Russia and India and Brazil and all these countries dumping the dollar left and right, and they can't wait to get rid of it. And to think that we're back at $15 silver, it's insane. I mean, even gold that's down $700 is still double what it was in 2006. So my feeling is that silver gets the brunt of all of this because it's the smallest market, it's the biggest thing that the bankers fear. It is the Achilles heel of the Western central banking system. And when it does blow up, it's going to be significant, to the point where I think that the manipulation's been so bad in silver that I think that when all the cards are out, we're going to see a 1-to-1 gold to silver ratio, and that's where the real generational wealth is going to be made.
Yeah, and I'm going to add several points to that. For one, the dollar is not strong. It's not doing well. It's basically trading at the top of a range it's been in the last 10 years. And of course, the reason it's, quote, the dollar index is higher is simply because all the other central banks of the world are ramping up this final currency war as they all try to destroy themselves, as we saw with Japan's crazy announcement, of course, what the ECB is doing, among others. I mean, people don't even realize that the Chinese, the PBOC, has printed more money than all of these central banks combined. But they do it quietly and under the auspices of this peg with the dollar, and people don't realize just how much money is being printed out there. And in fact, you talk about, Chris is comparing now to 2008. I call 2008 the good old days. And I'm not talking about right before the bubble broke. I'm talking about the bottom when everything crashed. If you look at global economies now, at global debt now, at global unrest now, at global currencies now, compared to the bottom of 2008, those were the good old days. Things are so much vastly worse than they are now when you throw in all the geopolitical tensions on top of that. And then, as far as, silver in particular, I wrote an article a year or two ago that's called, Irrefutable Manipulation Proof, showing how silver, since April 2013, has had a 2% intraday drop on 60% of all trading days. And it's gotten to the point where it's becoming 100% of all trading days. Especially when you talk about the opens, like on Sunday night or even Thursday night before silver was up 70 cents. It was down 2.5% because that's what they do. And yes, there's very little silver out there. We're seeing shortages everywhere, backwardation. The U.S. Mint is having record sales and they ran out. So I think that, a lot of things are going to come to a head. And, I truly believe that the Swiss referendum is the most terrifying thing that the powers that be have ever come across, because this is the ability to destroy this evil empire with the pen rather than the sword.
Now, turning to Chris, what is your perspective on the Swiss Gold Initiative? The plan is that they could repatriate all their gold back from the New York Federal Reserve, and that also the Switzerland Central Bank would also back 20% of their assets in gold. So what is your perspective on the impact this could have?
My overriding theme with everything is that there is no collective solution to collective problems. We need to look at the world and have the opposite consciousness. So I've always encouraged individuals to walk away, realize that the world is insane, but you don't have to suffer the collective fate. That being said, if the Swiss referendum did pass, it would be huge. But I just know after working in politics, on Ron Paul's campaign, and knowing all the internal machinations and how much power is involved here, I think at the end of the day, it's going to be close, but just not passed. Just like the Scottish referendum for freedom, and we'll see what happens with Catalonia and stuff like that. It's just there's too much insider power. You cannot create power by begging at the feet of power or working within systems. You have to go out and be independent of the system. I look at what the Chinese and the Russians are doing. They're no longer begging at the feet of power at the IMF. They're no longer, begging the World Trade Organization. They're no longer doing that. Since the 2008 financial crisis, they've been out, stacking gold left and right, and they're creating their own power. And as a result, now they have stronger trade alliances with all the BRICS nations that now have a greater purchasing power parity than the G7, which I find is amazing, and they're ascending, and the Western banks are descending. So the Swiss would be very, very wise to peg their currency to gold once again and become what they once were, which was this international banking house that was away from that. But I fear that the Swiss powers that be, they'll throw a monkey wrench in this vote, and at the end of the day, we won't see much come of it.
Well, I would agree with Chris on every single thing that he said, particularly regarding the fact that you cannot trust anything that goes on. I'm even reading an article today in Zero Hedge, how central banks use swaps to boost their gold holdings. What it's basically saying is, well, the Swiss could win, and the Swiss bank will still not buy gold. They'll just do swaps, which, amazingly, the IMF, which somehow is the authority on international gold accounting, says you're allowed to do without claiming that it's off of your balance sheet. But what I believe is, regarding Switzerland, is that this is the most independent people in the world financially. There's a growing anger within the country as to what's occurred over the last 10 or 15 years within the country with the basically commandeering of the system, almost like the way the Federal Reserve was created, the selling off of their gold, the destruction of the currency. I mean, geez, they just had a referendum to raise the minimum wage to $25 an hour. That's how much inflation has been created over there. So while I do believe it's almost shocking that something that the people can actually do has a chance to have an impact, this is a real potential. And, you mentioned Scotland and Catalonia. Well, look, I never even heard of the Scotland thing until right up at the end. I don't think it was ever that big of a movement, and still it came close. And Catalonia, as we saw last weekend, 81% of the people voted yes and 4% voted no, which I think is very empowering. So I think there's a very good chance that the yeses come out in this. I mean, right now the polls say so. I'm not going to handicap. We'll see what happens. But either way, it's nice to see that the people are actually moving forward. And, who knows what will happen. Look, the Swiss are unlike any nation in the world when it comes to people. I mean, yes, there's plenty of Swiss people out there who are as clueless as Americans or Europeans. But there are plenty out there, too, that realize that the ability for them to remain financially neutral and a powerhouse in the world is something that needs to be addressed, and this is an opportunity to do it. So,
you would think after all this FACTA legislation and the UBS, whistleblowers and all that other stuff, that the Swiss banking system would be totally for this to reclaim their sovereignty from the domineering United States from imposing their will upon the Swiss, and they need to back this referendum. And unfortunately, I think that there won't be. I don't think it will happen. I mean, one of the things I learned in researching this is that it wasn't just Gordon Brown that sold half of England's gold at the bottom, at $285 or whatever it was back in 2001. It was also the Swiss that sold half their gold. So that tells me that there's some people inside that system that are out to cut the legs out from the Swiss and bring them into this global order, and they do not want an independent banking system outside of it.
Well, absolutely. They're as compromised as any of the others. They sold their soul to the Western people, the Western bankers, 10 or 15 years ago. But this is an opportunity, unlike over here, for the people to repeal that. I mean, I wrote an article this morning, it'll be out later this week, about Ferdinand Lips. He's a very famous Swiss banker who wrote a book called Gold Wars. And he very famously, back in 2002, said, first, it is a given the gold's, first he said, that is the S&B on New York's leash. The once strong, proud, independent S&B has been degraded to an offshore branch of the Federal Reserve, reporting directly to Alan Greenspan. And then he said, but gold's time is still to come. And this is 2002. If the S&B does not stop its sales, Switzerland will have to buy back its gold one day, but at a higher price. And he died in 2005. But I don't think there's a reason why I titled this the most prescient statement ever made, because I do believe that there are a lot of people angry for exactly what you're talking about. Yes, the Swiss had 2,600 tons of gold and sold 1,500 of them at an average price of about $350 an ounce in the early 2000s, which pales compared to what the Bank of England did, selling much less gold, even if it was at a slightly lower price. So the people are very well aware of these handful of bankers that secretively, almost secretively, broke down the constitution of Switzerland that required a gold backing and put them in the position that they're in today. And then you throw in, as Chris said, all these FATCA rules and they're breaking down the privacy and making the Swiss think, hey, if we want to be independent, this is our chance to do it, and we don't have to fight a war to do it. So, hey, we'll see what happens.
So, Andy, if the Swiss Gold Initiative is passed, did you want to expand on how you think that would impact the Swiss Central Bank? I know in an audio blog you talked about that it would basically be equivalent to ending the Swiss Central Bank.
Sure, as I said, they'll be as relevant, trying as a neutered dog trying to get a dog pregnant. I mean, they'll have meetings, they'll pretend they're important, but without that money printing machine, without that printing press, they are impotent, and that's the whole point. You literally would be taking the weapon out of their hands, again, I understand exactly what Chris means. They are fighting it to the death with propaganda. They've got all kinds of tricks up their sleeve. One of them has been this, smashing of gold and silver this month, which has worked against them. Because now you're having huge increases in physical demand. You have the backwardation. You have mining companies going out of business. It's only going to cause problems for them in the long term. But yes, I completely concur that if they vote yes, the power of the Swiss National Bank will be dramatically reduced, no matter how they try to spin it.
Before we move on, I was wondering, Andy, do you see that if the Swiss vote yes on this initiative, then they could possibly be an example to the rest of the world?
Yes, Catalonia was an example to the world, and even Scotland to an extent, because that was a pretty close vote. I think everything that's going on now is empowering people, and it's funny because, Chris, you are all about people. people empowering themselves. And I was always saying, well, I don't think that the people ever do anything for themselves. But sure enough, these things are actually happening. Venice, Italy will do the same thing. And Catalonia will not be denied. So, I think people are being empowered by the hatred. We talk about the hatred of the dollar and what the United States represents in just a short 10 or 15 years, what we've done to the world. And all the dollar, people need to focus on the strong dollar. They don't realize that for the rest of the world, that strong dollar means crashing currencies. And that's what I call the single most precious metal bullish factor imaginable. I mean, is anyone watching what's going on with the currencies around the world, especially the commodity currencies? The Russian ruble, the South African rand. I mean, these things are in free fall. So while we call the world deflationary, they are seeing massive inflation. So I really, really believe that the people are starting to have a say in certain places around the world, and each yes vote will only empower more people to give yes votes.
Yeah, Catalonia and, all these independent things are all like tremors towards the grand earthquake. I am of the belief that the powers that be are not going to leap mountaintop to mountaintop and somehow avoid a massive crash, and that they're going to be able to, dump the dollar and, run right into the SDR or, some gold standard, like Jim Rickards would have you believe. I believe that once the facade is off, once the illusion has been broken, once the crash starts, once the reverberating effect of the leverage and the debt and the inequity and the power and all that other stuff, everything is going to come apart at every level, not just politics, not just finance, social contracts, political contracts. Everything will be broken, and everything is going to devolve down to the most local and responsive level. And if that's a small, independent region like Catalonia, or a father in a neighborhood, trying to get food together, that's where it's going to go. And from there, we'll see power rise again, and there will be a massive transfer of wealth from those that have kept their wealth in fiat, intangible paper assets and thrived off the debt and death paradigm, to people who do create value, to people who do have friends to rely upon, to people who are, good moral people who have the reputation and their word means something, to people who would work for and with each other without being paid. That's where power is going to go to, and I think that's the grand focus. And I try to get people to stop worrying about all these things outside of our control, the good, the bad, whatever happens, and just keep focused on what we can do every single day. And I appreciate even doing discussions like this to keep me focused and realize how close we are, and that every day is a gift that we can go out and do something. Andy was saying before the crash of 2008, yeah, those were the good old days compared to the political tensions that we have now and the debts that we have now. Well, I tell you what, today is going to be the good old days when the next crisis comes.
Right, and of course, right now, a lot of the world is not experiencing the good old days that we're having here with our record unemployment and entitlements. Because right now things are going downhill pretty rapidly. And again, I can't emphasize enough that I'm not saying here, well, Switzerland will be the catalyst that breaks everything. I think it will be a severe blow to the powers that be if it is a yes. But we can't count on that. Ending the gold cartel or somehow making our life better will probably make, in general, life worse, which is why you need to prepare now. And again, I can't emphasize enough, as we're talking about here, 2008 was the good old days, and I wrote an article a couple weeks ago that says we are right now at 2008 with one temporary exception. And that exception is the fact that the PPT has been able to keep the stock market higher. Because without that right now, we'd be way beyond 2008. We'd be into the world Chris is talking about right now, which will be somewhere from horrible to worst case. And that's why you need to prepare for a worst case. Is it going to hurt you to buy silver at $15 or gold at $1,100, or to stock up some food, or as Chris said, reach out to the community, to people that you can trust, because you're going to need possibly every one of these advantages, and hopefully only some of them. And it could be very soon, like the Swiss vote, or it could be 2 years from now. But it's not going to be 5 or 10 years from now. Something major is coming between all of the implosion of global economies, and explosion of debt and geopolitical tensions, and these wild currency swings that are being caused, in what I call the final terminal phase of this fiat cancer.
And now moving to Chris, I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about this, implosion of the currencies. recently we just saw the Fed end their quantitative easing officially, but then Japan and Europe are also, it seems like, hyperinflating also right now. So did you want to discuss a little bit about your opinion on the money printing going on around the world right now?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, people need to realize that they're one and the same organism. The Japanese are no different than the Americans and the Europeans. They're all bought and paid for. They're all part of the Western Banking Alliance. They're all under the Rothschild, Rockefeller, industrial war machine, money printing thing. So just because the Fed, cuts off some public quantitative easing doesn't mean that that's it. I can't imagine how much operations happen on a minute-by-minute basis, backing up and backroom deals. This is just what they admit to. There's never been an audit of the Fed. There's no way that we would ever know, the real deal that goes on. And then, as a matter of fact, as soon as the Fed stopped, Japan went forward and started pursuing this dream of expanding their central bank's balance sheet. So all they're doing is measuring shit against shit. I hate to use the term, but that's what these currencies are, and that's what the dollar index is. So that's why dollar looks relatively strong compared to the hairy carry that the Japanese are doing to their currency. And ultimately, the Japanese are totally bought and paid for nation. Ever since the United States invaded, took over, and established their dominance over that culture, that they don't have any independence. And when the time comes, the Japanese society will be sacrificed. If there's ever a conflict between the United States and the Chinese and Russians and the North Koreans, they're totally in a very bad position, much in the same way that the Europeans will be sacrificed for England. All this stuff that's going on with Ukraine is to foment a struggle between, just like they did in World War I and World War II, against the European continent against, Russia. And if the Europeans and the Russians were wise, they would realize that all along it has been, the City of London and the New York bankers that have profited off of this death empire and not get involved into another land war in Europe. And the Japanese would be wise to realize that they were gutted and taken advantage of after World War II. The Chinese would realize that the Anglo-Americans invaded and destroyed their nation with 2 opium wars, bringing drugs in there. The Indian continent was subverted by the British, for so long. All the problems result right back to the City of London and the Federal Reserve and the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, and the world would be wise to wake up and say no more.
Yeah. I mean, every currency in the world, not just the Western currency, every currency in the world are tethered together by the abandonment of the gold standard. They all allowed it to happen. It wasn't just, well, Nixon took us off. They all allowed it to happen without making a peep. And since then, everyone has been tied to each other, and particularly to the giant anchor that is the reserve currency. So, if one is printing more money at any given time, and then they slow down, then someone else has to pick up the slack, because it's one big global Ponzi scheme. Now, of course, as I've repeatedly written and proved in many cases, the Fed didn't stop. Are you kidding me? The Fed just realized, back in 2008, they're like, oh my God, we got to tell everyone what we're doing. We're lowering rates. We got to go to Congress and tell them that they need to vote for top or else. Now they just say, oh, we'll just print it and not tell everyone. So believe me, if the Fed says they're doing something, they're doing the opposite. All that they care about is trying to keep the stock market up. That's why 3 weeks ago, Bullard, the St. Louis Fed guy, says, oh my God, the market's down. I think we need to delay the end of QE. Then it goes back up, and yesterday he goes, well, now there's higher inflation expectations, so we'll go back to what we were doing. They just run around like chickens with their heads cut off. And, all these countries, I couldn't agree more. London and New York are the 2 biggest, the 2 biggest destroyers of culture in the history of mankind, and London's been doing it for a lot longer. And as for Japan, the problem with them is their demographics. They've always been 10 years older than everyone else. So it's not a surprise that their markets collapsed 10 years before us.
Look at the energy balance too, Andy.
Yeah.
Ever since Fukushima, they've had trade imbalances where for 30 years they had tremendous amount of record surpluses. And now, because the energy swing has happened and they've shut down, the majority of their nuclear power plants and they've had to import oil, and more raw commodities. It's weakened their currency to make imports even more, and now they're doing record upon record deficits. So you throw in their demographics, their record amount of debt that's, I think, 3 times higher than what the United States is on a per capita basis, like 329% of GDP or something obscene about that. Their Japanese central bank buying up 100% of the bonds, driving rates down, their aging population, the energy, then throw in the fact that they're within a Scud missile strike of China, North Korea, and Russia. Man, I wouldn't want to be in Japan.
Yeah, I've long maintained that Japan will be the first world country to experience hyperinflation. And again, all these talks about the dollar is going to crash, people have said it forever, even Jim Sinclair said it, there's not a chance in hell that the dollar could ever fall to 50 or 60, because there's no way that the lesser currencies of the world could survive the kind of trauma that would bring that on. What we're seeing right now is exactly what I would expect to happen. We see the lesser currencies start to collapse first. It moves right up the line, and eventually it'll go to the yen, the euro, and of course the dollar. And we're seeing it with the yen now. They know that they have no choice. They know that if they didn't do that extra round of Abenomics 2, or whatever you want to call it, it would have imploded right there. Not only that, but overtly saying we're buying stocks. I mean, can you imagine? It's what the Fed does, but at least the Fed doesn't say they're doing it. So we're going to see Japan fall apart. I expect the yen to go to 200 or 300 to the dollar, the way it was back in the 70s and 80s. And I don't know if that culture will survive the inflation that's coming, especially if there's an oil shock.
Yeah, I just want to build on Andy's point about these currencies, and what he just said was right. And I guess I never thought about it. I've always waited for the dollar collapse and looking at the DXY chart. But I think Andy's right, where all these currencies are going to die off one at a time, and it's going to become a reverberating factor that when one market starts dying off, the financial powers and the guys that are moving this money around, they're not going to think about, maybe I should get out of all paper currencies and all stocks and all counterparty risk, and that this is all a Ponzi scheme. They're just going to, from one place to another, and maybe the dollar, goes tremendously up because everywhere else in the world seems dangerous, and they'll just think, well, the United States is the worst place to be, and run there. But we could see the final movement of the dollar going up in relative terms to all these other crap currencies, simply because it's the biggest, largest, most liquid pool out there, and that's where the biggest, baddest guys with their nukes and military and dirtbag bankers. But at the same time, that's when you'll see gold and silver rise in dollar terms, which to me would be extraordinarily bullish to have the dollar go up in value relative to all these crap currencies, and watching gold and silver rise in dollar terms even more against that too. So, that's
absolutely,
a good.
Absolutely, because again, I've been fighting this whole stupid strong dollar thing forever, because between 2005 and this year, the dollar index did nothing. I mean, you saw gold go from 300 to 2,000 with the dollar index doing nothing. The fact that the dollar goes up or down against the euro means nothing. It's immaterial. And again, people don't realize, I was on Wall Street for 15 or 20 years. I don't even know what the number is because I left 10 years ago. The fact is, these people are all money managers, whether you're a hedge fund or an individual or a sovereign wealth fund. You manage money. You don't say to yourself, well, I'm going to assume the world collapses. The one thing you can't do when you're managing money is be short and wrong. You can't be people like us who are saying, well, I'm betting the end of the world. I'm going to buy gold and silver and not own markets. Everyone has to be long everything. So they're going to own stocks until stocks fall, like they did in 2000 and 2008, and like they're doing right now. And they're going to own the most liquid currency that they can until they all crash. If you get a crisis, they're not going to all initially, after being brainwashed for 30 years about paper securities, say, well, we're all going to sell our currencies and we're going to sell our dollars and buy gold. They're going to say, well, I got to get out of the Brazilian real, I got to get out of the Thai baht, and I got to get out of the Russian ruble. And then as things get worse, well, I got to get out of the Japanese yen, I got to get out of the euro, and they wind up all in the dollar. The problem is, by getting out of all these currencies, they're crashing the entire world. And that's exactly what's going on right now, is all these currencies crash one by one. The dollar's not going up because of strength here. It's going up because of fear, because the global economy utter collapse. And as things get worse, you're going to see more and more of the money management of the world race into the dollar just to get at everything else. But at the same time, the world will crash, and it'll cause even more people to be buying gold and silver. So, if we're not going to have a black swan event like a nuclear war or something, I truly expect the dollar not at 50, but probably at 150, but gold at $10,000 when all is said and done with the fiat currency system.
Right, and it was really interesting because Alan Greenspan recently, I know, Chris, you reported on this, that he was actually interviewed on the Council of Foreign Relations, and Greenspan was talking about that even the dollar is not the supreme currency. He said that gold was actually the supreme currency, and I found this kind of interesting to hear from a former Federal Reserve chairman saying that gold was actually the supreme currency. So that actually goes right along with what you guys are saying, is that it might not be the dollar that starts to collapse first, but all the currencies are going to collapse, but it's going to be gold that is actually going to survive. Did you want to discuss a little bit about what Greenspan said, Chris?
Yeah, well, I think any of our listeners know the whole golden economic freedom that Alan Greenspan wrote in 1966 and the objectivists with Ayn Rand. It doesn't come as a surprise. And no, I do not think that Alan Greenspan purposely rigged the system to blow up, and that he's actually a good guy. He's an opportunist. He sees the writing on the wall, and he's an egomaniac, if anything else, for a person who reveled in the world hanging off of his every word that he went to. God, I remember back in the 90s and 2000s watching him, how big his briefcase was, and CNBC, practically, fawning over themselves over all this stuff. All he's doing is telling the truth, which seems very odd. But this is setting them up for, it's not going to be another fiat currency. It's going to be gold. That's where this game is all played at the highest level. And when I finished up in that little video, I said that while all these world players, China, Putin, Greenspan, the CFR, they're all playing and moving for gold because that is the most liquid, most trustworthy, premier currency of the world. What they don't get is the story about silver. Most gold investors in the United States who even listen to us don't get what silver is relative to gold. And I don't care that if they do make gold the world's reserve currency, and that's the backing for the next system, which I am totally against a gold standard. I'd be totally against a gold-backed cryptocurrency, which I'm sure that they'd have lined up and ready to roll out at a moment's notice. But what needs to happen is investors need to say, okay, dollar's going to die, stock market, bond, all paper currencies, I don't care what you got, you cannot have money in there. Gold is going to be the last man standing on a global political stage, which these nations need to trade between each other and stuff like that. But it's going to be too expensive and too impractical for the average man to use. And I think the most purchasing power is going to come from silver, because I tell you what, when the illusion is lifted off of this whole fiat currency and the world goes back into a gold rush, because there's no rush like a gold rush. As soon as people wake up to the insanity of what gold represents, they're going to wake up and start rushing for it and do anything for it. Well, I tell you what, once that illusion's been lifted and all these nations are racing for it, and Andy and I are seeing there isn't enough to go around now in this completely depressed market, much less during a currency crisis. Good luck trying to get gold and silver then. It's tough getting it now. But when all this happens and this perception of the global world starts going, wow, we have lost everything, we've been fooled about everything, we only trust things that are in our hands. I think that the accounting for all these paper contracts, this $5 trillion in paper contracts that have been reported that have been used to hold silver down, and that the COMEX is trading 100 contracts for every 1 ounce of silver. I think there's going to be far less silver out there than there is gold, and that's why I think at the end of the day, after all is said and done, when the true counting of what's out there and what's there, I think there's going to be far less silver. And knowing silver has far more industrial uses, especially for the next generation in technology and energy and medicine, that silver on a per ounce basis will be worth as much, if not more, than gold.
Right. Well, when we talk about Greenspan, again, the only difference between him and Bernanke and Yellen is that he's smart. I would rank Bernanke and Yellen as two of the dumbest people to ever work in the government. They are complete puppets. They have no idea what they're talking about. They are dangerous like vipers because they have no idea what they're doing. At least Greenspan knew that he sold his soul because he was the ultimate gold advocate. He was a follower of Ayn Rand. He wrote Gold and Economic Freedom. He knows exactly what he was doing all along. And the fact is, right now, as we have been writing here at Miles Franklin for weeks now, he's simply just trying to whitewash his legacy. He's trying to rewrite history so that when everything crashes, he's not known as the single most important or the single biggest destroyer of humanity, which I believe he is. It's not that he's the only one, but no one has done more to destroy humanity than he has, and he very well knows it, which is why in his very old age he's trying to pretend that all the things that he did, he didn't do, and that all along he believed in gold, which he certainly pretended that he didn't when he was the Fed chairman. And again, Chris is talking about the future, and people again they mistake what we say as saying, well, we're going to have a gold standard, et cetera, et cetera. I have no idea if we're going to have a gold standard. First of all, if we had a quote gold standard, I don't think that it's going to be anytime soon. There's a giant chasm between now and the gold standard, which may be World War III and draconian government and all kinds of horrible things. So I really don't care. I wrote an article a few months ago that says, is gold money? Who cares? Because the point, we're telling people to buy it to protect themselves, to protect their purchasing power, gold and silver, in the meantime. And who cares if there's a gold standard somewhere in the future? Because we just got to get to that future. That's the whole point. And and again, when you talk about gold versus silver, of course silver is cheaper, and of course silver has more purchasing power, has been more manipulated, there's less of it. And, I firmly believe, as Chris says, that gold-silver ratio is going to trend toward 1. So one day silver will be too expensive, just like gold is. And then, this is your opportunity to protect yourself, not to make zillions. I mean, zillions of what? Dollars, euros, yen? It's your chance before we get to that chasm between this fake world and the new world, which could be 1 year in the future or 50 years in the future, to protect what you have.
Well, so on the same topic about gold and silver, you were just talking about the gold-silver ratio. This viewer wants to know about, I know Mike Maloney has talked about this, about the silver-to-house ratio. The viewer asks, in 1980, it took 1,000 ounces of silver to buy one house, but this time it's different, he says. We have less silver than the 80s, more debt, more people, and more manipulation. So do you see possibly like a 500-ounce silver-to-house ratio?
I did a video called, Forget the Dollar, 1 ounce of silver buys 15 acres of land. And I used it relative to the purchasing of the Louisiana Purchase. And that's what Thomas Jefferson paid Napoleon, which was 1 ounce of silver for 15 acres of land. Now, albeit that was the wilderness that was unconquered, I don't think we get to that level. But look at how many arable acres of land there are in the world. And there's 8 billion arable acres of land in the entire world. Well, Eric Sprott, if he's right, says that there's only 1 billion ounces of physical silver. So does one ounce of silver buy an acre of, 8 acres of land? I don't know. Could it buy an acre of land? Probably. So I don't think that we'll be measuring, silver in terms of, houses and stuff like that. I'm thinking we're going to be doing it in terms of acres. During a hyperinflation, silver goes to whatever, and if Zimbabwe had that thing, and it went up to trillions of dollars, well, all your debt is denominated in dollars. So if the dollar becomes completely worthless, pennies will buy it off at the end of the day, if it's copper or silver or gold. During Weimar Germany's hyperinflation, an ounce of gold bought city blocks. So no, I don't think 80s is a good relation for the silver-to-house ratio, because the United States still had a functioning economy. They still were probably the world's largest energy producer and probably the world's largest exporter. The United States is the mere shadow of what it once was. They're dead and in the grave. There's so many houses out there, and it's uneconomical. I think the places that are worth the most now are going to be the absolute worst places to be. You know, you look at all these multi-million dollar penthouses in Manhattan. Man, I wouldn't want to be anywhere near Manhattan when this all goes down. You know, the centralization of 10 million people, aggressive people who are suddenly broke, disillusioned, out of jobs. Who knows about the food and energy coming in there? Who knows about all the prescription drugs being able to go in there? You know, Andy's right. We don't buy gold and silver to make money and, you know, to buy houses with. This is a survival thing. This is just to get us through what could possibly be the worst thing that ever happens to humanity, which is the collapse, a worldwide collapse of all global currencies. I mean, I can't think of anything that could possibly be worse than that.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's bad enough. It's apples and oranges trying to measure gold versus silver. The reason people focus on that ratio is because, well, frankly, it was pretty much fixed for hundreds of years at, you know, the rate that one comes out of the earth versus the other, which is, you know, that's not, you know, how you should think about it in the future. It's just, you know, what it's been in the past. And of course, you know, now that silver has it's been depleted and has all these industrial uses, it's even more apples versus oranges to say, well, the gold-silver ratio was X in the past, therefore it should be X in the future. But when you talk about silver and houses, they're not even, you know, it's fruit versus rocks. I mean, you can't compare a house to a piece of metal, especially because, you know, I mean, you can't compare houses in different markets, let alone compare them to the gold-silver market. It's not a matter of, and it comes back to the question, some people say, well, when should I sell? Because I want to, and what should I buy with it in the future? Should I buy a real estate with it? No, you'll hold gold and silver because they're savings. It's not investment, it's saving. You'll hold it because you expect other things in the world to go down in value versus some more so than others. Heck, there may be some houses in the world that go up against the price of gold. If you have the best house in the entire planet, the best location, but for the most part, most things are going to go down during a collapse. Most items of real value against gold and silver. And I can't concern myself with measuring trying to quantify this relationship.
Yeah, I mean, look at Detroit, guys. I mean, you could go and you buy probably a house now for an ounce of silver. You don't want to be there. Well, that's what the United States is going to look like, Detroit. Collectivism destroyed probably the greatest industrial capitalistic city the world has ever known, Detroit, which is the birth of the automotive industry, the birth of the middle class. 1 out of 8 jobs were created out of that thing. And you go to Detroit today, and collectivism and communism and taxes and, you know, all this stuff destroyed that city. So, you know, could you go to Detroit now and buy a house for an ounce of silver? Yeah, but who wants to live there? Andy's right, man. If you own a piece of property that's got its own energy and its own food resources and it's, you know, got good neighbors and it's away from everything, yeah, it might be even worth more than the relative amount of gold and silver today. I would doubt it, considering how low silver is, but, you know, I think the whole perception and values of what people are going to, you know, find worth something is going to change. It's not going to be the Manhattan apartment. It's going to be, you know, perhaps fortified living surroundings. It could be how close you are to water resources. I wouldn't want to be in Southern California when this all goes down. You know, you'd be better off near the Great Lakes region. That could be the next boom area. There's going to be a massive switch in perception of value in every single thing from top down, from our political ideals to our financial ideals to what we think is important in life. People are no longer even going to want to work because they're going to realize that they worked all these years for nothing and they've given up the best years doing something that they freaking hated. Can't tell you how many people I know that are waiting for retirement. That's a death sentence. That means you're literally doing something that you hate. I get up every day and love what I do, and I've walked away from careers, and Andy has too, to pursue what is good in us. And I think that's what this is the kind of transformation I think society is going to have after they hit rock bottom.
This one is from Jason, and he's wondering what your exit strategy for silver would be. He says that he plans to watch national and global events to help in timing of selling and will plan to sell in percentages of his total holdings over time, but will always hold a certain amount to pass on to his family. Just to quote him a little bit more, he says, I believe the silver to gold ratio will also be a key indicator to watch and plan to sell percentages of my holdings as it reaches a 1-to-1 ratio. If it does reach a 1-to-1 ratio, I will convert the majority of my holdings into gold and invest in other relevant assets at the time, most likely real estate. So he's asking, do you feel that his strategy is a good one? And, I mean, if not, what is your strategy?
Well, that's a nice little strategy on paper. Sounds good to me. The problem is we just spent the last 10 minutes completely debunking it. The fact is, gold and silver are not investments. They are money. You hold them to protect yourself from the future. And again, if he's talking about, the situation, a gold-silver ratio going 1-to-1, it's kind of like saying, well, the dollar is going to go, the dollar index is going to go to 50. If the dollar index went to 50, it would entail some unbelievably traumatic circumstances to mankind, as will what happens when the silver-gold ratio, if it does, goes to 1 or even close to that. And again, who knows what's, say we're going to buy real estate, we're going to buy this, we're going to buy, I don't know what's going to happen when the cartel is broken, when the currencies crash. It's all going to be bad. It's not going to be anything that you look forward to, and it's certainly not anything you can plan for. Again, that guy is writing down an investment strategy. These are not investment strategies. I said before, people ask me, what will I do? When will I sell my silver? I don't know. I'm holding my gold and silver until there's a better alternative. And I don't think there's going to be a better alternative anytime soon. So yes, maybe you will buy a house one day with it. Maybe the world will be a good enough shape that it's not like Detroit and you can buy a house with it. But maybe it will be World War III. I don't know. The point is, right now, I don't care. I just want to get from point A to point B with my financial survival and, frankly, my personal survival.
What is your opinion on this, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to kind of just, what he said. Once I woke up to understanding what gold and silver are, and I came from a family that created a lot of debt, made a ton of money off of creating all this debt. I'll never not know that silver is real money. I'm never gonna get back into stocks per se, and just throw out all my physical wealth and go back into paper wealth. I think that we're dealing with things that are way beyond the scale of knowing, and that we need to simply get to the other side, and we can be there. The wonderful thing about gold and silver is that you will have choices in the future, whereas if you don't, you're going to be committing yourself to generational serfdom. If you don't have physical wealth, you're dooming your family. What do I plan on doing? I've talked about the ultimate exit strategy. Maybe not creating a silver bank and borrowing against it and never selling it, because there could be confiscatory taxes against it. I don't know. The wonderful thing about gold and silver, it gives me the opportunity to make a decision, whereas people who are poo-pooing gold and silver or still invested in the stock market or whatever, they're not going to have a choice. The decision is made for them as soon as the currencies are collapsing, and I'd much rather have a choice to go buy a house, go buy property, go invest in a company. But I think the best use of that capital is going to be is to have the capital to look at what humanity needs in the future. And I can tell you what, all the stuff that has been the good for the past 30 years of commercial real estate property, and I think of all the guys that made tons of money off of that, and people selling trinkets on TV and all this entertainment stuff, that will be worth nothing. Like, you will see starving artists again. You won't see Jay-Z and Beyonce blowing $8,000 bottles of champagne on their yachts. You'll see starving artists again, because the perception of what is valued in that world will completely change. And we could get into energy production, food production. That's where the first best use of your capital is, right afterwards, because those are going to be the most pressing needs. And one thing I talked about at the Silver Summit 2 years ago was to say that stop thinking about profits and losses and what to sell and buy. Start thinking about how you can be a blessing to other people on the other side. How are you going to be able to pick up the pieces of the families that are going to be lost? Because quite frankly, I look around at the people that I know, and not a lot of people are prepared. And I don't know if I'll be able to take care of my own family, much less be other people. But you need to get into this abundance mindset and stop thinking about that you're going to be the next bad landlord, and that you're going to be the guy on the top. Because all you're going to do is just replace one psychopath with another psychopath. This should be an opposite consciousness. It should be an evolution of humanity that should benefit from this.
All right. Well, moving now to our last viewer's question from John. He's wondering about what your perspectives are on possibly the government introducing a windfall profit tax on precious metals if they start to, skyrocket. So I guess we can start with Andy.
Well, absolutely. That brings a softball question because anytime someone asks one of these what-if questions, I guide them to a piece I wrote about 2 years ago called Priceless Precious Metals or Worthless Dollars. And the point is that the government doesn't do things in a vacuum. When we were in late 2008 and the world was falling apart, then they decided to debate in Congress whether they should confiscate the IRAs. Just like when the market was, quote, crashing a month ago, Bullard comes out and says, well, maybe we should delay QE. They only do things in a vacuum. They're not going to come out tomorrow and say, oh, yeah, we're gonna confiscate gold and windfall tax it, because that would just be admitting that their superiority as currencies. Now, what will happen is the world falls apart, the currencies fall apart, no one wants the dollar, everyone wants gold, there's a black market, and then they get together and say, okay, we're going to windfall profit tax it, or we're going to ban it. And, but if you had dollars instead, they'd be worthless. So you have some contraband gold. You can give it back to the government and maybe get some for it, or you can go in the black market like they're doing right now in India, like they're doing in plenty of places around the world. I wouldn't worry about any of those things. What I would worry about is what the world will look like if there was a decree to windfall profit tax. And I don't think it would matter at all, because it would be an entirely 100% black market at that point.
Yeah, I did a video too saying that they're going to confiscate your silver, and it's gotten 350,000 views on YouTube. And the theory is, when do they do that? Do they do it ahead of time? Are they going to confiscate silver and go door to door looking for Granny's Mercury dimes? I don't think so. I think that'd be they risk their quadrillion-dollar empire of lies with the derivatives and stuff. If you see the United States federal government all of a sudden clamoring for Granny's silver dimes or silver ship coins or whatever, how weak is that nation? And I think they risk losing their trillion-dollar bond market, their currency swaps, and all sorts of stuff. So I don't think they're going to do it ahead of time. And then how are they going to do it afterwards? Because then it comes down to who are the people that are going to do it. I can tell you what, I know a lot of police officers and military people and all these people that are invested in the system and only doing their job because they're getting paid. When the Soviet Union collapsed and the ruble died, soldiers didn't show up for work the next day because they had a lot more pressing matters to take care of their own families, and the paychecks that they got paid for were worth nothing. So I don't think that there's going to be a gold confiscation before, because they risk, blowing up this, Ponzi scheme that they got running, and I don't think they'll have the power after to do it. And yes, there will probably be a black market. Even during 1933, you think everybody in the United States turned in their gold coins? I highly doubt that. And now, and that was with a pretty obedient, Christian, you think about the mindset back then, kind of following leaders and FDR and the church and stuff like that. Now, God, everybody's rebellious. That would be like the lamest decision. They can't even get people to sign up for free health care, much less, to turn in whatever real assets they have. And what good would it do them? Like, what good is, some silver going to do to this $1 trillion thing? They're still not going to be able to fund all these wars and government entitlement spending. They'll blow through it. I mean, what? How much?
Forget silver. I mean, silver. There isn't even any silver out there.
Yeah,
and Americans don't own gold. So even if they got every ounce that we all had collectively, it wouldn't matter much. And again, you look back at 1933. Okay, what really happened was, before the decree, and remember, this was the first thing that FDR did, but before that, before he got in office, the administration was saying, people, remember, the gold was back, it was a gold-backed dollar, and they said, people, we need to get out of this depression. Can you please sell us your gold, and we can use it to expand the money supply and get out of this depression, and then you can have it back. You get your dollars that are backed by gold, no problem. People gave it in hordes, because as Chris said, they trusted their government back then. But as soon as they did that, then FDR came in and says, okay, now you can't have it back, and we're going to confiscate. Well, anyone who hadn't given it back didn't do it,
And they revalued it.
So people learn not to trust their government, and they also, now we don't even have a gold-backed dollar. So it would never happen, and there wouldn't be enough gold anyway to make a difference. So I don't think gold could ever be confiscated. It wouldn't even matter. And how would they get it?
Who would they confiscate it from? You're not going to go door to door. They would most likely take it from,
GLD.
Yeah, the GLD. They'll confiscate the miners. Any of these guys. That's where it's going to be.
Yeah.
Well, Andy Hoffman and Chris Duane, I really wanted to thank you so much for your time today. I guess before I let you go, did you want to share any last thoughts with our viewers, and where can our viewers find you on the internet? And I guess we can start with Andy.
Sure. I mean, the last thoughts are no different than the thoughts that we say all along, other than to don't underestimate not just what's going on in Switzerland, but around the world. There's a lot of angry people. This is a sign, that the system is finally breaking down, when you're starting to see people rise up and actually make statements like the Catalonians did, like the Scottish did, and like the Swiss really have a major opportunity to do. Just be prepared, because anything could happen in the next few months. And as always, you can get me at milesfranklin.com. I write every day.
Where can our viewers find you, Chris?
Probably the greatest truth ever told on YouTube. You can also go to the coins that I do, Silver Shield Collection.
Well, Andy Hoffman and Chris Duane, thank you once again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.